Hey everybody, it's Sean. If this is your first time checking out my YouTube channel, my name is Sean Barry and I'm a creative professional with over 30 years experience in the business. I'm also partner and creative director of a small boutique agency here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada called Booster Rocket Media, where we do all kinds of cool things like website design, logo design, and branding. And branding is what I'm going to talk about today, in fact. Branding basics, that is. But before we get to that, a quick note about today's video sponsor, Graphicstock.com.
Graphicstock.com. Over 250,000 images, and lots more images being added regularly. Click the link in the description below to begin your 7-day free trial.
And Graphicstock has provided all the images for today's video, so I'm thankful for that. So let's just get into it. So branding basics. So obviously branding is much too large a topic for me to talk about in one video. And there's no way that I can cover all the principles and everything that goes into branding because it is such a deep subject. However, what I can tell you is this. Branding is sort of based on the WYSIWYG idea. What you see is what you get. And that's really important as a concept when we begin talking about branding, because when you think of that restaurant or you think of that clothing store that you go to, you are expecting a certain experience each time you go. And that is a really important thing to identify for yourself and for the brand that you're developing, whether it's for your client or for yourself. That everything that you put into the brand is making a promise that then the brand has to deliver. And in delivering that promise, you have to take into account every time somebody sees a web page, every time somebody sees your brand on social, every time somebody interacts with a brand in real life, they have expectations that either are met or not met based on the execution of that brand at any given time, which includes your own posts on social media and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit when we get into the material in just a moment. But I just wanted to say that I'm basically going to deal only at this point with a basic visual and a basic communication strategy for branding. And even in doing that, I'm only going to hit one possible aspect of it. Because again, this is such a deep topic. I may end up doing some kind of a premium course on that down the road as part of my college series, which I'll be talking more about soon. But in this video, all I can really do is plant a seed for you. And I hope that what I can give you is a few ways to begin thinking about branding in a slightly different way. Or even if it's the same way you've always been thinking about branding, maybe I can help you to target that thinking a little bit narrower and stay on a path as you begin developing a brand for yourself and for your clients.
Okay, so back here at the desktop, we have this InDesign file that I've built, and I want to walk through some of these things that I was talking about in the intro. Essentially, what is building a brand and what are the basic elements of that? So if we begin with the idea of what branding is, generally speaking, I just wrote this little description, but now this isn't everything, but this is kind of the idea that branding is, of course, logos and colors and style. But it's not just that. It's language, it's images, it's presentations, the way you deal with clients or customers, the kind of shirts you wear, what your door looks like, how you answer the phone, sign your emails, what type of deals you offer or don't offer, promotions, events, posts in social media, and pretty much everything you do and say. All these things contribute to a brand. Now, when we talk about a brand and what these things are contributing to, it isn't just a restaurant or a clothing store or a national brand. However, if we begin there and identify what that really means, all this stuff on the screen comes into play when you think about clothing store, restaurant, grocery stores, all the places we go day to day. There's an expectation that you have, and that expectation has come from several different sources. What it really is that WYSIWYG idea. What you see is what you get. The expectation has been set, and it is either met or it's failed to be met when the brand is engaged. But let's sort of move on from that and let's talk about some of these basics and how they actually play out. So the first thing I'll talk about is images. Now, images, again, this is by no means the whole branding story, but it's a place to begin. It's something that we can easily identify and talk about. I think you'll see where this is going once we kind of get rolling. Courtesy of Graphicstock.com, I have these initial images that I found. Now what I did was I went on to Graphicstock and I had a look around for various subject matters, more of which you'll see in a moment. But I decided that, what could I find that if I were building a brand would sort of all contribute to a single branding effort. And of course, I showed you these because I think dance is interesting and I think these photos are fun, but this is also to demonstrate one idea, which is if you are going to use a stock site like GraphicStock to find images to build out advertising, to build out websites or whatever you're going to be working with, one key thing that you can do, and it doesn't always work, but you can look for a photographer who may have shot a series of photos based on an idea that you can then use. Now, it's always great if you can, hire a photographer to do this stuff for you. If you have that budget, then of course you can control this process. But if you look at the guy in the top left and you look at the girl in the bottom right, they're different people shot possibly on a different day. They're in different outfits. One's a guy, one's a girl, this dude is sort of more dancey, this girl is less dancey, but they still have the same vibe. So that's just the point I wanted to make, is that you can actually seek these things out. So here on this page, we have a series of illustrations. And these illustrations were done by different illustrators. But if we look in the top left corner, these two images here, we can see that there's a silhouette kind of, black and white only application, even though this one has color in the background. Sort of ignore that for the moment. But the idea that a silhouette using negative and positive shapes, you could look for illustrations from different illustrators if illustration is your preference instead of photography. You can look for the same kind of similarities, except with illustrative value, not with photographic value. So my point about these two pages, both of these, the photography and these illustrations, is that you can approach them similarly when you're looking through stock images to try and find something that kind of works together as building a brand. But let's now talk about our project for today. So I've gone ahead and found a bunch of business images. Now, the reason I chose business is that it may not be the most sexy subject or the most interesting visuals, but it is so neutral and there are so many images available in this topic that at least I can use them all to demonstrate several of these principles. So we're going to use that as our theme for today. And essentially I've just grabbed certainly not every image that I found. Of course, there are thousands and thousands of images of business. These are all from GraphicStock, of course. And so all these things are business metaphors, and these images represent various different metaphors. But they don't match. All these images are kind of a mishmash of different things, different styles, different photographers, different concepts, different focus and emphasis. And so while each individual image is pleasant, well shot, and interesting, it is not necessarily a successful collaboration of images. And that's easier to demonstrate if I sort of take these things down into smaller groups and kind of analyze them. So these two images are exactly the same thing. When I say exactly the same thing, what I mean is it's a business image. It is a person writing on a surface that is between you and the camera and essentially making a chart or making a graph. So that's what both of these images are about. So in that way, they are identical. However, they're obviously not identical in every other way, which is the style of the photograph that's being shot, the photographer, the approach, the emotional attitude. So it's important for me to look at these images and decide whether or not my trick is going to be a zero background, or if I'm going to have something warm, out of focus, a little more realistic, as in the bottom image. So these are choices that I would make. And if I'm looking at images and evaluating them, I'm going to think about that as I look deeper into it. Now, this next page of images is, once again, each one of these images is basically identical in the sense of what it's trying to communicate. It's sort of, people working together and, accomplishing things and working hard. This is kind of the idea. But of course, these are three entirely different interpretations of that, both visually and conceptually. So when you think about it, if I were to have chosen one of the images on the previous page, I've got to find a second image now that communicates an idea using the same basic principles. But all three of these images are communicating the same thing. They're just doing it in wildly different ways. And they give you a different feeling, and that feeling is something you have to evaluate as well. And on this next page, we sort of have Three more images. Now the top two, or rather the left and the right image, are very similar, except that there are some key differences. That becomes obvious when you look at 7, 8, 10 images. You begin to see these trends that you want to identify for yourself. And on the bottom left, of course, we have an entirely different way of doing the exact same thing, which is, hey, everybody's great, hooray, it's, we win, or it's the end of the day, or whatever, whatever they're thankful for. In that bottom image, we have the same deal, except everybody's looking directly at camera and, the guy with a thumbs up. And it's an entirely different way of doing the same thing. Now, in this case, we have portraits, which of course could be, staff portraits on a website or whatever. And again, even now, we're getting into way more subtle differences. But these differences do actually have an impact when you consider having 6, 7, 10, 15, 30 images on a website or in your brand library. You have to think about these things. So top left image, the girl is sort of in that kind of pose where she's looking casually at the camera. She's not working at the moment, and her shoulders are kind of raised, and her expression seems very unbusiness. Not unpleasant, but just unbusiness. It's not a terribly business type image. However, she's in a business setting. So it's important to recognize that these subtle things can shift the feeling and the meaning of the shot. Top middle girl is probably the most neutral of the top row, where the girl on the right side kind of has that tilted body and that sort of eyebrow raised as if to say, what did you just say, or whatever. So you can kind of get that very different vibe. But if you pull back, you can essentially evaluate them and say all three of them are pleasant, well-shot portraits of women in business environments. Why don't they work together then? Well, they don't for these reasons that we're talking about. They subtly start to shift. And if you have a lot of these images, that can really have an impact. Same with the bottom row. So the guy in the far left, hey, I'm Chad. He's got that really sort of serious look on his face. And if you look at the middle image, the guy down there is just kind of like, hey, I'm Joe and I'm at work and everything's fine. But the guy in the bottom right there is sort of working away like, oh, sorry, you interrupted me, but that's okay. Hi, how are you? Similar to the girl in the middle top. And is that the same image? It could possibly fit, but you understand the point that I'm getting at, is that you have to evaluate these things. If every one of your shots was somebody being interrupted at the moment they were doing something, then that should be what everything is about, if that's your trick. So you can see that these images show different tricks, and you have to be aware of those tricks because they all have to work together. Which brings me to this last set of images I want to quickly show you to make this point, that is. There's more images. But essentially, this is now a territory that I consider kind of the, I have to explain myself territory. So it's very conceptual to imagine this girl holding this clock, which people never do, and she's looking at the camera and she's making kind of the duck face, but not a happy one. So what does this mean? Does she sell clocks? Is she unhappy because it's lunch? What exactly is the idea here? Sometimes these things aren't terribly clear. And so you'd have to explain that. Girl in the middle, what is she upset about? Similar to the right side shot, these two people working together. His expression isn't particularly happy or angry. He's just, I'm not really sure what he's doing. She's taking notes, but she kind of looks like she'd rather be anywhere but there. So it's kind of an odd message that once again I have to explain. However, let's talk now about what we can do. So after going through a number of images, what I did was I came up with a fake company, which I will show you more about in just a moment. Then if I've been saying I don't think all these images work together, then what does work together? Well, I think this works together. And I've made a little note at the bottom here to kind of show what it was that I was looking for when I was assembling these images together. So I looked for people working together. I wanted a positive vibe, specifically not to be aware of the camera, so they're not looking at the camera. The shot is taken at a moment of revelation or discovery. There should be more than two people. There should be some diversity, and collaborative, not managed. But this presents a new problem, that these images, while they are the same type of concept, they don't necessarily look like they belong together yet. But with a quick adjustment, I can do that. So after I discovered the images that I liked, so I decided I would give everything sort of a warm feeling. I would tint it with orange, even though what you're seeing is kind of greens and different things emerging. That's just a result of adding that warm orange filter to it. There's no harsh darks. It's all slightly overexposed. I've desaturated the images, again, slightly, and a preference toward shallow depth of field. So having made those adjustments to the images, I now have a collection of images which I can look at and go, yeah, these sort of work together. If you see all these images, you get it. They all are coming from the same place. Which leads us directly into this next territory, which is language. And language is the words that you use to express your brand's message. This can really have an impact. This is an important area that people don't think a lot about, but they should. So in this first example, I've just grabbed one of the images that I found, that I've made my edits to, and I've placed some basic copy over it. This is not as a layout, but this is just to put the words together with the visual and kind of see what we have. So we have business services that include consulting, financial planning, business audits, process review, and staffing. Please contact us for more information about our services and rates. All of that is true. I mean, it's true in the sense that this is a fictional company I've made up, which I will get to in a moment. But everything there is true. It's just not terribly interesting. And with that said, we pop over to image number 2, and let's see what it feels like with a bit of a different spin on the copy. You need consulting, financial planning, business audits, process review, or staffing? You need us, smiley face, several exclamation marks. DM us and we can tell you more about what we do, exclamation marks. Now, LOL. Okay, you might be thinking that's a bit of a silly selection of language for like a business brand or whatever, and you're right, it is. However, I see this all the time. So people representing brands, whether that brand is themselves or the brand that they work for, often make these mistakes anyway. They still do it. You've seen it and I've seen it. So even though this might not appear on a brochure, it really does appear in the brand experience when people who represent this brand are talking through social media, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, or interacting with people through email, any of those things. All this stuff does have an effect. And the effect in this case is that it's very hard to take them seriously, or at least take this statement seriously. However, if we pop over here to image number 3, I think that this is the right kind of balance for copy, and it might go something like, the right financial planning, business audits, process review, and staffing are important in today's markets. Growing your business effectively takes a team, your team and ours, working together. Get in touch with our team today. So it's a positive language, and it's a collaborative language. It's not as serious and dry as the first example, but it's not as goofy as the second one. But it has something from both. And I think this is a nice balance for this little brand that we're building here. And so with that, we'll move on and we'll talk about presentation. Now, in this case, presentation isn't a PowerPoint presentation literally. I'm talking about presentation like the graphic design, sort of final version of what you would see if you visited this fictional company online. And let's see how all this stuff is working together. Okay, so this is obviously not a real website, and it's obviously not a real company. I'm not showing you this for logo design. I just made this up quick as an example. But I wanted to show you how the communication overall and the brand message can be presented based on all the stuff we just talked about, is the whole point of this. So Unishare Business Services is the fake company I came up with. And the brand kind of direction for this is a positive, collaboration-based solution style of language and presentation. Blue is trustworthy and gives nice contrast to the images. So if we were to look at this website, first page on the left, growing your business takes time, effort, and teamwork. We're ready. That's a very collaborative teamwork kind of message. It's also very solution-based. In the center, we have our strategy is simple. We make your vision our vision. Shaking hands and agreeing to that vision. So the image supports what the copy is saying. The copy supports what the brand direction is about. Much like on the right side, we prefer collaboration to delegation. So you can see that these things present together very well. Our image strategy is working. Our communication strategy is working to support the images. The tone of the images match the tone of the language. And all of that matches the idea of the brand of Unishare. So this is what I'm getting at when I'm talking about pulling things together that work together in larger scale, not just isolating one image you like or don't like, or writing one line of copy because you think it's funny. Branding is all about this collective fabric of everything which knits together to create one single experience. So with all that said, what about your brand? But let's take social media as the example, because so many people use social media to promote themselves, because that is, of course, the way business is done. And so this model happened to appear in some of the images in my previous examples as well. I assume there was a photographer that knows this guy and likes to use him, so he's in lots of images that I found. And so I thought this would be a good little case study to show kind of the differences between how you present yourself. Now, all of these are professional photographs, and not every photograph you put on social media will be a professional photograph. You can take a selfie of yourself smiling, you can take a selfie of yourself laughing maniacally or staring straight into the camera. All these things are possibilities, and what you do with these images as a result has an effect on your brand in social media in particular. How people feel when they first encounter you or when they encounter you on a regular basis. So I just did this quick little mashup of what you could imagine would be a profile picture and some kind of a post. But you get the idea that what you post and what people see has a lot to do with the same things we talked about for branding. So in the top left, we have this guy kind of looking very strict, very stern, directly into the camera. And this statement, if you want to be the best, you have to work the hardest. So on the right side, I work for my clients and I work for results. Let me help grow your business. And we have this guy, once again, looking very serious, but it's not a strange photograph. It's just a pretty intense one. And that's fine. But if we go down to the bottom left, now while this may seem like an unusual example, I see this all the time in social media. Some kind of a strange cropped photo and then, using these really sort of bad grammar, bad presentations of what would otherwise be supposed to be advice. And it falls apart. In my opinion, it falls apart. Now, that being said, just a reminder that what I'm talking about in this case is promoting yourself as a professional on social media. I don't mean that if your Facebook page or your Twitter account is solely for you having fun in social media and trashing people and doing whatever you do with your friends and followers, then I'm not saying that this is wrong. But I'm saying that if you're promoting yourself as a business person, whether that business be graphic design, of course, I'm talking mostly to graphic designers on my channel, but if you're an accountant, if you're a musician, whoever you might be, these things all kind of come into it. If you want to be a professional, you have to look and sound professional. Now, conversely, if I use these images, top two guy sort of laughing, sort of just a little bit too much, and then, of course, the bottom left, maniacal laughter. And, on the right side, the really unnerving, obnoxious cropping, like really in close, like, hey, it's just me whispering right in your ear. And you're like, oh, back off, dude. I see these kinds of things on social media all the time as well. And it's important to remember that these things also have an effect. Now, in my opinion, I'm just going to say this has nothing to do with what I think you should do in social media. This has nothing to do with your Facebook or Twitter accounts, generally speaking. But if you are going to promote yourself in social media, you're going to be a professional. Generally speaking, neutral, positive images. And I work for my clients and I work for results. Let me help grow your business. If you look at these things as a communication, the profile photo, the message itself, these things do work together. And having said that, the last thing you should do, and what I see so many people doing in social media, is jamming a logo, all their services, their website, and their phone number into a profile picture and using this to promote themselves. It's the dumbest thing you can do. Unless you are Coca-Cola, you personally are Coca-Cola, you shouldn't do it. No one takes a logo and a bullet list and an email address seriously. Be yourself. Talk about your services if you wish. Talk about your website if you wish. Send people there if you wish, where on your website you have all the bullet lists and you have all the email addresses and all that kind of stuff. No one wants to engage with a logo. So that kind of rant aside, my final just sort of comment on this stuff is I don't mean that everybody should have a profile picture like this, but whatever you're doing in social to build your brand, you got to get behind the right thing that's going to communicate to your audience the right things about you.
Okay, so hopefully that all made sense. I know it's kind of a deep subject, and again, I was only able to glance over the surface of it. But at least if you can think about these things and hold them in your mind, especially when you are interacting with people in social media, if you are branding yourself that way and self-promoting, then make sure that you do it right. Make sure that, and by right, I don't mean my way specifically, but right meaning the right way to communicate what you're trying to communicate. And there are some right and wrongs, not based on my opinion, but based on just real execution and how people really will perceive you. And hopefully some of those examples get you thinking about that a little bit. So anyway, that's the video for today. Once again, thank you to GraphicsDoc.com for their sponsorship of this video and for the great images. And I will see you again soon. More videos will obviously be coming, and I'll be talking more about my premium courses in the future. And until then, you make sure that you stay classy as always, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.